3 days after I filmed this video, the world got the news of the untimely passing of Sophie. Sophie was an amazing artist, a trailblazer, and an inspiration to everybody in the genre that we now call hyperpop. I feel like I had to mention that out of respect for her and her family. Also, I want to mention if you are getting ads on the video, it is not because of me, and it's because the label copyright claimed the video for having copyright music in there, but chances are you won't get ads. But if you do, now you know why.
Hi.
My name is Patrick CC, the most hydrated YouTuber on the platform, and today we're talking about hyperpop.
Drink water.
Now, if you haven't heard of hyperpop, then you're probably severely out of the loop, at least in terms of the upcoming SoundCloud scene. However, hyperpop isn't exactly new, but it's easily the most diverse, unique, and unconventional genres that's shaking up the music industry. The genre blends styles of pop, dance, bubblegum bass, EDM, emo, cloud rap, and hip-hop. Hyperpop is happy. Hyperpop is sad. Hyperpop is fun. Hyperpop is chill.
Oh, yeah. Never felt so.
Hyperpop is angsty.
I'm so cursed, I'm angry as fuck. I wanna kill myself, but you calling my bluff, and your boyfriend was to me like
Hyperpop is lovesick.
Like your mind, like your smile, like your eyes, I could die. Aeroplane, you are so fly, singing songs like Jeremiah.
Hyperpop is complex. It's so multifaceted, it's hard to trace where exactly it came from or why it's even called hyperpop. Like all genres, there is much debate as to who created hyperpop. And you can find endless examples of people who were early adopters or maybe had stylistically implemented hyperpop way before it was ever a genre. So if you think that I failed to mention an artist that was an incremental part of the growth of the genre, I apologize. Or maybe you could just comment them down below, or maybe there was a specific project you had in mind. But I think the beginning of what hyperpop is today starts with A.G. Cook and his creation of the PC music label / collective. Cook was a visionary for recognizing a big gap in the representation for pop and electronic music around 2013.
Everyone, I think it is this attitude where they're not separating high and low culture, or not seeing like pop music as a guilty pleasure, or kind of enjoying some aspect of the craft and having this sort of experimental attitude, not because of just needing or wanting to experiment, but just because they're just interested in music as a sort of form.
People commonly treated pop as a guilty pleasure, rather than just appreciating the music for what it is, and they viewed electronic music as a man versus machine, or just bleep bloops with no real instrumentation. The blending of these attitudes, styles, and representation is where the PC music label falls and would kickstart a new generation of non-genre bounding music. AG would later connect with Charli XCX and Sophie, who are both considered to be pioneers in the scene. If I may simplify, I can say Charli has more of the qualities of a traditional pop star, and Sophie has more of the qualities of a traditional EDM DJ / producer. However, both are very much decorated in the fields of songwriting, performing, and producing. These three artists would push to create a more genuine style of pop music. It seems like their inspiration was bringing the true artistic qualities back to pop music and trying to redefine it, as it was commonly known as this ultra-manufactured, soulless, and disingenuous music created by this factory-like network of the music industry. Actually, Sophie was a big inspiration to my own music that I used to produce way back in 2014 through 2016. I remember when she dropped MSMSMSMSMSMSMSM and Lemonade, and I remember how the EDM community, underground EDM community, was reacting to it and how hype it was. And when I first came across it, I really thought that she was just another, I guess, DJ slash producer. And obviously later I would find out that she was a lot more than that. But from 2013 to 2018 and 19, you had many, many different artists making super experimental genre-bending music. Anyways, fast forward to summer 2019 when 100 gecs exploded onto the scene with their project 1000 gecs and popular single Money Machine. My reaction, and others at the time, was pretty similar. What is this? Why is it popular? And I don't know how to feel about it. But it was one of the most interesting bodies of work that I had ever heard, and after a few listens, I really appreciated it. It reminded me a lot of Sophie and the electronic music I was once obsessed with, and this was actually before I even knew that they ever worked together. But it also had elements of hip-hop that I was currently obsessed with. gecs got the attention of a lot of media outlets, receiving generally high praise for being an experimental and extreme blend of all different popular sounds today. They organically blew up from simply making really interesting and unique music. You love to see it. It was Dylan Brady and Laura Les who inspired a new generation of SoundCloud artists to venture down the road of what we now call hyperpop. SoundCloud, since its inception, we could argue, has been the forefront of new music trends that become ultra popular. But there's also styles of music that SoundCloud adopts that is unique to the platform and sort of exists in this cult-like underground space. I think hyperpop is somewhere in the middle of this right now. It's an underground community cultivating fan bases on SoundCloud, but you have certain talented artists bursting out of it and on their way to mainstream stardom. I also feel like I have to mention this, but the hyperpop SoundCloud scene also takes a lot of influence from Blade and Drain Gang. A lot of Blade's cadences and singing styles and even the way he mixes his vocals can be seen as a direct influence for a lot of artists. And most definitely his aesthetic, art style, and music videos have been impactful to the scene. I think it comes from the fact that not everyone is going to be able to make the insanely complex quality work that Charlie, Sophie, and gecs do. And not to minimize the talents of the underground hyperpop scene or the talents of Blade himself, but I think that trying to achieve a Blade type of sound is a little bit more achievable when you are working with a smaller budget or you just don't have as many resources at hand. Since the underground hyperpop scene came about, we have been seeing more and more rising talents such as Glaive, Eric DOA, Black Winter Wells, Midwest, Dollywood, and my personal favorite, Osquin/Parker. The ideology that A.G. Cook and the PC Music label was founded on, of making pop music more genuine and less of a guilty pleasure, seems to run true in the current hyperpop scene. But as it gets bigger and that sort of mentality starts to become more popular, it starts to get a little confusing. In 2019, Spotify created the Hyperpop editorial playlist, which some believe to be the certification of the genre name. But whoever runs the playlist seems to be a little confused as to what the genre is. Now, I know hyperpop is a multifaceted genre, but there are songs in here that simply don't fit. I'm pretty sure the community itself is grateful for the hyperpop playlist, as it does help them get recognition and streams, but occasionally it will fail to represent the genre accurately, such as putting artists like Nav in there. Another thing I've noticed that with the adoption of the upcoming hyperpop scene is there's a lot of crossover in terms of the fan bases with the underground or upcoming hip-hop scene. Now, hip-hop, if we think back to the 90s, was heavily based on the premise of be 100% original, don't steal from anyone, write your own lyrics, and obviously over the past 30 years that's kind of changed a little bit, but that mentality still runs a little true. And the foundation of the hyperpop scene, if we are giving it to A.G. Cook and the PC Music label, was based on a lot of the premises of being collaborative and being influenced by each other and sharing ideas and not being territorial over music. And these two different ideas and mentalities are polar opposites, which I've noticed has a negative effect on fans adopting the sound. On the hip-hop side, some of these fans are just looking at these artists as gecs clones or derivative 100 gecs, which is really frustrating because the whole idea behind the genre was to share ideas and be influenced by each other and take that and bring them into different directions, not just trying to be the most 100% original artist. Plus, I would personally argue that drawing comparisons between upcoming hyperpop artists is a lot more difficult than upcoming hip-hop artists because their musical styles and the way they mix their vocals and the way that they choose their instrumentals or whatever is way more complex and different artist by artist than hip-hop. Hip-hop tends to have a lot more similarities artist by artist. That's just my opinion. I bring this up because the hip-hop market in terms of streaming, in terms of fan bases, is a huge market, probably the biggest one. And in order for hyperpop to grow, I believe that a pretty sizable chunk of that is going to have to adopt it. And I think that that sort of narrow-minded mentality is going to take a little bit to shift in favor of the hyperpop artists, if that makes sense. Did that make sense? But will hyperpop ever be mainstream or truly dominate the mainstream sound? Well, that's kind of a loaded question, and it just depends on the way that you look at it. If we agree that the PC music label is the origin of the current scene, then we can assure being mainstream is not a concern of them. Their goal was to bring the art and the beauty back to pop music. And if you listen to the PC music roster, you can quickly realize that they are not compromising their art at all. If anything, it's getting more and more experimental. But you could also argue that they're already mainstream to a degree because, well, their fan bases are growing every day. As far as the SoundCloud scene or the artists coming up, it's hard to tell what their intentions are or where their careers will go. There's no doubt these artists are getting major label recognition and some of them are even signing major deals. Atlantic seems to have vested interest in the hyperpop scene since they have 100 gecs and Charlie XCX under their roster. And judging by their music, it's safe to say that artists have full creative control and the label is likely not butting in on the creative process. There's no way for me to tell what these major labels are interested in or where they see the scene going, but I have a few speculations. Labels sign what they know and understand. My hope is that with gecs becoming so big and not compromising their art at all, labels will start to understand and embrace the complexities in other artists' music. Basically, I hope that they trust the creative minds of these upcoming artists. But since labels sign what they know and understand, I feel like we're gonna get a couple of these half-ass, watered-down hyperpop artists that are trying to capitalize on the market there and earn $1 without trying to show love to the pioneers of it. Kind of like what we saw in the rap/emo rap scene. I also have a feeling that we'll get a Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, or Ariana Grande type figure that puts out some watered-down hyperpop song and is now going to be seen as like on the forefront of this new genre, at least to the mainstream's eyes, and it becomes this massive Billboard success, which inevitably will be good for the genre because it'll put more eyes and ears on it, but ultimately is kind of defeating the purpose of the original origin of the sound. Unless you have one of those pop artists working with Sophie or gecs or A.G. Cook or any of the founders of the style trying to create something together, which would obviously make a lot more sense since they sort of founded the genre. And I think that would ultimately be actually really cool. I think it's safe to say that hyperpop is here to stay, and it's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the music industry. I don't think it's just a trend or just a phase, but that's just what I think. What do you think?